I remember it like it was yesterday. The sky was painted with streaks of orange and pink as the sun began to set, and there was a chill in the air that told us winter was on its way. It had been weeks since any of us had seen Tyler, and we were getting worried. He was the kind of guy who would vanish for a couple of days, sure, but this was definitely different. His phone went straight to voicemail, and no one had seen him at school. "Let's just go over to his place," I suggested to my friends as we sat on the worn-out couch in my living room, trying to decide what to do with our evening. Mia, always the cautious one, frowned. What if he doesn't want to be found? Lucas, ever the optimist, chimed in. Then at least we'll know he's okay. He's probably just been caught up in some new video game or something. Zoe, who had been quiet, nodded in agreement. "I think we should check on him. It's not like Tyler to be gone this long without a word." So, we set out, the four of us, walking through our small town as the last light of day faded. Tyler's house was on the outskirts, near the woods, and as we approached, something felt off. Even though his house has always been in a creepy area, it still held a laid-back, peaceful energy. So this new feeling had us all feeling apprehensive. The front gate creaked ominously in the wind, and the path to the front door was overgrown with weeds. "Tyler?" I called out as we stepped onto the porch, the wood groaning under our feet. No answer. The front door was slightly open, which was strange. Tyler's family was super careful about locking up. We pushed the door open and stepped inside. The house was silent, the kind of silence that presses against your ears. Dust motes floated in the beams of light that pierced the darkness. It looked like no one had been home for a while. "Guys, look at this," Mia said, holding up an envelope from a pile of unopened mail. The date on it was from over a month ago. We called out for Tyler and his parents, checking every room, but the house was empty of anyone. It almost felt like no one had lived there for years, but we all knew better. That's when we heard it, a noise from the backyard that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. It was like a whisper, but it was calling my name. It actually sounded like Tyler's voice, if he had been sleep-deprived for decades and was about to lose his voice. We rushed to the back door and peered out into the growing darkness. It was so dark outside that we couldn't tell what had made the noise. But as something moved ever so slightly, we began to notice the thing that had spoken. And that's when we saw it, a figure not quite human, standing at the edge of the woods. Its eyes reflected the little light there was, and it whispered our names again, a sick imitation of Tyler's voice. The thing looked fleshy, but some of its skin looked a little torn and stretched out. Actually, it might not have been its skin. It was wearing it like clothing that didn't fit quite right. And with every sudden twitch it made, little cracking and squishing noises could be heard. I'll be honest, I could barely see the thing, so what I thought I saw might not be what it really was. I will say though, it was a freak of nature. Fear gripped my heart, and it seemed like I was the only one with any courage. Everyone else was stunned, as though they couldn't think anymore. All eyes were glued to the thing that looked like it was about to rush at us at lightning speed. "Run!" I yelled, and we didn't hesitate. We bolted out of the house, not stopping until we reached the safety of the streetlights. While we ran, I could have sworn I heard the creature try to follow behind us, but it must have given up. It let out a mixed blend of voices, all yelling for us to come back. One voice was definitely Tyler's, and it was the last thing we heard from that thing that night. Out of breath, we decided to go to Mr. Henderson's house. He was a retired cop and would know what to do. We told him everything, and he called the police right away. The cops searched Tyler's house and the woods, but they never found him or his family. They've been missing ever since, and no one knows what happened to them. Of course, it seems obvious now what likely happened to them. After some searching, we found out that the monster we'd encountered was likely a skinwalker. We never went back to that house, and at night, when the wind howls, I can still hear that voice calling out to me, trying to lure me back. I'm not foolish enough to try to go against that thing. Tyler would want us to learn from these events and do everything we can to prevent them from ever happening again. If you ever suddenly hear a voice from a friend that's gone missing and you don't see the person, think twice before trying to follow it. These creatures will work against your senses. They're also not afraid of us, and why would they be? They can disappear into the night in an instant and seem to be very strong. And they wear people like clothes until they decide they want to have a new outfit. Please, don't end up being that new outfit. The night was unusually quiet as Jake and I walked through our neighborhood, the only sound being our footsteps echoing off the pavement. Streetlights cast long shadows and a chill hung in the air. We were discussing plans for the weekend when a sudden movement caught our eye. A dark figure stood a good distance away, hunched over something on the ground. Just seeing that was enough to tell me that something was definitely going on. My neighborhood has always been peaceful. We don't get many strange events. I remember stopping Jake before he could keep walking because he hadn't been aware of our surroundings. He often never knew what was going on until it was right up in his face. The person, if it was one, was making guttural, groaning noises that sent shivers down my spine. It was like it came from a demon or something. To put it into terms you might be able to visualize, it was like a blend of sharp, exhaling sighs that kept going seemingly without end. "Hey, are you okay?" Jake called out, his voice betraying a hint of concern. I almost felt annoyed at him that he'd said anything at all. We could have tried to make a getaway before the person noticed us. The figure didn't respond, just continued its unsettling feast. I still hesitate to wonder what exactly it was that the person was eating, though I do remember it looked stringy, pale, and smelled like roadkill. Fresh roadkill. We took a few cautious steps backwards, not wanting to intrude, but also unable to tear our eyes away from the scene. That's when the chaotic moments happened. The figure slowly rose, its movements jerky and unnatural. As it turned around, the dim light revealed its grotesque appearance. The flesh seemed twisted, hanging off the bone in a way that was profoundly wrong. Its eyes were glazed over, devoid of life, yet they fixed on us with a predatory glare. Only time I've ever been stared at like that was when Jake was starving and wanted the last slice of pizza I had in my hand. In a moment of pure terror, it lunged forward, arms outstretched, ready to grab us. Instinctively, we turned and ran, sprinting in opposite directions. After all, our houses weren't in the same areas. I could hear the creature's ragged breaths behind me, its footsteps, and they were bare footsteps, pounding on the pavement. I didn't dare look back, as much as I wanted to, my heart pounding in my chest as I navigated the familiar streets that suddenly felt like a labyrinth. It was pretty dark that night. Eventually, I burst through my front door, panting and shaking, not sure if I had escaped or if the creature was still out there. I waited, agonizing minutes ticking by, until finally Jay called. He was home, safe. We talked about what we saw, trying to make sense of it, but we couldn't. Once more the neighborhood was silent, but the memory of that twisted, hungry gaze haunted us, leaving us to wonder where the strange figure had gone, and if it would return. Although, of course, we both hoped that that would never happen again. I'm still definitely terrified, and I haven't been the same since. The old school building stood like a relic of the past, its walls echoing with the memories of generations. As a security guard, I'd grown accustomed to its silent corridors and creaking floors. The night shift was usually uneventful, just me, my flashlight, and hours of silence. But there was one night that remains etched in my memory, a night when the stillness was shattered by something unexplainable. It began as a whisper of unease, a feeling that crept up my spine as I made my routine checks. The doors were all locked, the windows secured, yet I couldn't shake the sensation of being watched. I tried to laugh it off, to convince myself it was just the isolation playing tricks on my mind. As the hours ticked by, the building seemed to come alive. The distant slam of a door echoed through the empty halls, a sound that should have been impossible. I checked the security monitors, but they showed nothing amiss. I ventured down the corridors, my footsteps muffled by the thick carpet, the flashlight in my hand casting a pool of light that seemed too feeble against the enveloping darkness. The air grew colder as I approached the source of the noise, a chill that seeped through my uniform and settled in my bones. I found myself outside the old gymnasium, its double doors looming before me like the gates to another world. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the handle, every instinct screaming at me to turn back. But it was my job to ensure the building was secure, so I pushed the doors open and stepped inside. The gym was shrouded in shadows, the moonlight streaming through the high windows, casting an otherworldly glow. I scanned the room, the beam of my flashlight cutting through the darkness, revealing nothing but the dust motes dancing in the air. And then I heard it, a soft giggle, the sound of a child's laughter, coming from the far end of the gym. My heart raced as I turned toward the sound, my rational mind struggling to find a logical explanation. There was no one there, no sign of life in the vast space. I took a step forward, and the laughter stopped as abruptly as it had started. The silence that followed was oppressive, heavy with anticipation. I was about to leave, to write it off as a figment of my imagination, when I saw it, a shadow that seemed to detach itself from the wall. It was darker than the darkness around it, a void where no light could penetrate. It moved with a fluid grace, its form shifting and changing as I watched, frozen in place. The shadow crept closer, and I could feel a malevolent presence emanating from it. It was then that I realized this was no ordinary shadow. It was something else, something ancient and terrible. I felt a fear take hold, a fear that rooted me to the spot, even as every instinct urged me to flee. But then the survival instinct took over. I turned and ran, my breath coming in ragged gasps as I bolted for the doors. I could feel the shadows gaze on my back, a weight that threatened to drag me down. I didn't look back, not until I was safely outside, the cool night air a balm to my frayed nerves. I still work at the school, the memory of that night a constant shadow at the edge of my consciousness. I don't know what I saw, or if it will ever return, but I do know one thing. The darkness holds more than just the absence of light, and some things are beyond any understanding. As I walk the halls each night, I can't help but wonder what secrets the old building hides, and what other mysteries might reveal themselves in the quiet of the night. I awoke to the sterile scent of antiseptic and the rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor. My leg, encased in plaster, was a constant reminder of my vulnerability. It didn't hurt as much as before, but every now and then I could feel it throbbing harshly. The hospital room, usually a flurry of white coats and soft-soled shoes, was oddly quiet in the dead of night, which was something I was grateful for, since I didn't feel like listening to constant chatter at the moment. I had broken my leg after falling down a long set of stairs, and after lying in gruesome pain, someone called the hospital for me. It was a sharp break in the bones, an odd crunch that reverberated through my body and took my breath away. Since I lived in a house alone, I at least had peace of mind that no one would be frantically worrying about me unless I said something. While I gave a long, fatigued sigh, I heard the rumbling of something, maybe a truck, suddenly start up. I expected the noise to go away after a few minutes, but instead it started getting louder, stronger. This was no truck or large vehicle coming by. This was something else. Without warning, the earth began to tremble. The gentleness of the rumbling soon gave way to violence. The entire building felt like it was being thrusted into the air before it fell back down again. The walls groaned, the floor buckled, and the ceiling tiles danced chaotically above me. I was alone, my calls for help swallowed by the roar of the crumbling world around me. The bed jolted, wheels screeching as it slid across the floor. My heart pounded against my chest, each beat screaming survival. The window shattered, showering me with glass, and the lights flickered, casting monstrous shadows that clawed their way towards me. I couldn't think clearly because it was all happening so suddenly. I knew that this was an earthquake, but I was unprepared as to what to do because this was my first time experiencing one. Then the unthinkable happened. The ceiling split open, a gaping maw ready to swallow me whole. I watched, helpless, as a slab of concrete descended, its shadow growing over me like the Grim Reaper's cloak. In a desperate act, I threw my body to the side, the cast on my leg a cumbersome weight. The slab crashed down, missing me by mere inches, pulverizing the bed where I had lain seconds before. It seemed as though some good being was looking out for me. Either that, or I had just been blessed by a miracle I would never forget. Silence returned, as sudden as the quake had been. I laid there, amidst the rubble, panting and slightly bruised, but alive. The taste of dust and fear was thick in my mouth, but it was the silence that was truly horrifying. It was the silence of a grave, a tomb for the living, and I was its unwilling occupant. I wondered if everyone else in the hospital had managed to survive the earthquake, or if I had been the only one. These thoughts haunted me, but I had to focus on getting to a safer area. There are typically aftershocks, smaller earthquakes that occur after the main one. I remember hearing my teacher say when I was younger and learning about natural disasters in my class. Aftershocks, huh? Then I'll have to be very aware and hope that they don't strike when I'm weakest, like this one did. The day had been oppressively hot, the kind of heat that made the air shimmer and the pavement sticky underfoot. I had just stepped out of the grocery store, my mind preoccupied with the mundane task of putting away the groceries. But as I pushed the cart towards my car, I felt a sudden drop in temperature and the sky darkened ominously. I looked up to see the clouds roiling into a monstrous formation, the color of bruises and deep despair. A siren began to wail in the distance, a harbinger of the chaos to come. People spilled out of the store behind me, their faces etched with fear as they too saw the behemoth that was the tornado tearing across the land towards us. Panic erupted, shouts and screams pierced the air as everyone scrambled for safety. I abandoned my cart and sprinted to my car, the keys shaking in my hand. I could hear the roar now, a deafening, soul-shaking cacophony that drowned out the cries around me. I managed to start the car and floored the accelerator, but the tornado was upon us. It was like being in the grip of a giant. The car lifted and buffeted as if it were no more than a toy. Windows shattered, sending glass flying like deadly confetti. I could feel the car being torn apart, the metal groaning in protest. For a moment, I was sure it was the end. The world was a blur of wind and debris, and I could feel the car being pulled towards the vortex. But then, as quickly as it had begun, the pressure eased. I didn't hesitate. I drove as fast as I could, steering through the chaos, away from the relentless pull of the tornado. When I finally stopped, miles away, the silence was surreal. I stepped out of the battered car, my legs weak but holding. Behind me, the town was unrecognizable, a landscape of destruction where homes and lives had been uprooted and scattered without mercy. I stood there amidst the wreckage of what had been an ordinary day, feeling a mix of relief and profound sorrow. I had survived, but at what cost? The town was in ruins, and the lives of those I knew would never be the same. The tornado had passed, but it had left its mark on us all, a reminder of how fragile life truly is. Hope you enjoyed that story, and I'll see you in the next one. See you on the flip side.